Hey, how's it going? Welcome to my channel. If you're new here, do that thing down below. I've received a handful of questions regarding how I navigate when I do my trips, so I thought since I'm in the beginning days of a 2-week trip, that now would be a good time to have that discussion. And more specifically, I wanted to go over the comparison between using a dedicated GPS and a cell phone, using cell phone apps. There's some pros and cons of doing both, and then at the end I will talk to you about what I use. Now, real quick, I'm going to refer to a specific phone app that I've been using for 4 or 5 years. I'm not sponsored by them, it's just my familiarity with phone apps and what my experience has been with those. So I will tend to bring that up towards the end, but that's why. I want to say, since I left Central California on my way to Yellowstone, working my way through Nevada, Utah, Idaho, I might even be in Wyoming, I have had a blast just pulling through places and not having any idea where I am, which is because of the phone app. I've got a little blue line for my navigation that I take, and it doesn't necessarily say where I'm at, and I don't pay a lot of attention. I don't always catch town names when I come in. So there's a certain degree of, I don't know, it's a magic to coming in and not knowing where I'm at, and honestly not caring. It really doesn't matter. I'm on the bike and I'm traveling and I know where I need to be at the end of the day. So the places I pass through have been kind of fun. I need to do a brief interruption right here because on my last trip I had some significant navigation issues using a phone, and I don't cover that in the original filming, so I'm going to add a few pieces in this video that talks about some of the issues that I had. So stick to the end of where I'm talking about using phone apps over dedicated GPS to find out what happened to me out on my trip. So let's get to talking about the pros and cons of dedicated GPS and phone app. All right, pros and cons of a dedicated GPS. The first and most obvious is you can just plug in a location you want to go to, hit get there, and you don't need cell service, and no matter where you're at, you can plug in an address and usually be able to get to it. The second thing that I've really used dedicated GPSs for is finding gas stations. When I'm getting, the tank's getting low, I've got a gas tank light on, I will put in, find the nearest gas station. It hasn't always been accurate, but at least I know there's a destination to get to so that I can get gas. The other thing about dedicated is you can choose some of your route options to stay off highways and look at different routes to get there. You can add additional stops to it as you go, so it's a lot more flexible on the fly. With dedicated GPS devices, you can also create GPX files from your computer and download those, or you can get those from other sites, other routes that people have done, and download those to your GPS so that you don't have to create a route, but you can download it on there and not try to do it manually, which makes it very easy for navigation. All right, some of the cons of having a dedicated GPS is the country that you purchase it in is likely going to be loaded on there, or maybe the region of North America. But if you're wanting to go to other countries, you may have to purchase another map set and download that in. And that can cost anywhere from $30 to $60, $80, depending on where you're going. Now, different brands, I'm specifically talking about Garmin because that's what I had and what I was using. Different brands may have a little bit more flexibility, but that's something that you have to do. You can't just show up and then have that availability. In order to keep your GPS up to date, you periodically have to do updates. That's typically not a big deal to do. Hook it up to your computer maybe once a year and do that. But if you forget and areas change where you're going, it may not have the most direct or correct routing for you. And the last thing that I consider to be a huge con of dedicated GPS units is the cost. The cost of these can be anywhere from $350 up to $800 for a dedicated GPS unit. And then once you buy that, then you got to buy mounts to mount it on your motorcycle or find a way to do that. And then you got to try to figure out how to wire it in or just go with a temporary mount. So there's a lot of other considerations that go into putting a dedicated GPS on your bike. Now, those are some of the reasons why I don't use a dedicated GPS right now. But yeah, your experience with dedicated GPSs might be different than mine, and if you've had different experiences, things that you consider to be real big pluses, or you also agree on the negative sides of it, just drop that in the comments below and we'll move on to phone apps. Phone applications. Now, the first thing I want to say about phone applications is there seems to be a misconception that in order to be able to use a phone GPS application, you have to have cellular service, which is not accurate. If you download your routes onto your phone that you're going to take, then you do not have to have cellular service. And I'll talk about that real briefly with what I use, but keep that in mind when I talk about this. It's service free. I've done all of the pre-prep before my trip, so I don't need cell service at any point in time in order to be able to navigate. So the pros of having a phone app is everyone has their phone with them all of the time. And I see a lot of people, you know, on videos, and I run into them on the trail, and they've got both a dedicated GPS on their dash and their phone. So my idea is get rid of the GPS, just use your phone, and with one of the various apps out there, you can do all the navigating you need without that. The second thing is you can just download your route to your phone. I think even with Google Maps, you can do offline routing. The problem I found with Google Maps is usually that offline routing is only good for about 30 days. But you can do that so that you don't have to have mobile cell service while you're traveling. I find with the apps that the pre-travel planning is quite simple. You just get on your computer and you can route everything out from these different apps, and then go to your phone and just download it as an offline ride, and then you can open that up and do all your navigation from there, which that's all I've been doing. When I went to Baja, I did that, everything offline. And then on this particular trip, I planned out the 12 or 14 days of riding I was going to do. And then each day in the morning, I just open up the offline rides, say that I want to ride that, and that's what I do. If you ditch the dedicated GPS and just go with the phone, then you only need to have one mount, and then you only have to worry about powering up your phone, which with a USB connector, that makes it pretty simple. There's a variety of different connections you can make. So putting the phone on the bike and keeping it powered can be simpler than a dedicated GPS. All right, if you hadn't figured it out, I prefer using phone apps over dedicated GPS. But on my last trip coming back from Overland Expo West on Sunday, it poured down rain. Now that isn't necessarily an issue for me because I have a Samsung S8. I know it's a bit old, but it is a waterproof phone. So it can be dunked in water, and I wasn't really concerned about that. However, the issue that I ran into was the charging port got water in it. And as soon as the charging port gets water, it will not charge the phone, and it keeps giving you alerts. So what ended up happening is my phone ran for about 2 hours, and then it shut off. So from that point on, the remainder of the day, I had no navigation. So thankfully, I had studied the maps enough, and I ended up running into some guys that were also coming from that area, taking a detour through Jerome and Prescott, that I followed them for a while, and they kept me on route. And then because of the map study, I kind of knew where I was going. So if you are going to do phone apps, have a waterproof case, make sure you keep the charging port sealed up, or have a backup phone or something like that. The other thing with the apps, depending on the app, is that you can do routing in different parts of the world without having to load or purchase different map applications. So with the app that I use, I was able to do everything through Baja just straight from their app. I've looked at different parts of the world that I would potentially consider wanting to ride through, and I can see I can create offline routes right from their app, and it doesn't require anything else. Now, some negatives of just using a phone app or just your phone for navigation: it's not necessarily going to offer you the most flexibility. If you're in a remote area and you're wanting to maybe go somewhere that you hadn't planned for, and if you don't have service, you might not be able to get there. And then phone apps, in order to get all of the services that they have available to them, it's going to require a subscription. And I do pay for a subscription with the phone app that I use. I find it to be perfectly acceptable with all of the mapping and routing that I use and all the functions and features that it offers. But with that being said, there still is a subscription. I think for mine, it's somewhere between $5 and $6 a month in order to get all of that, which is still cheaper than buying a GPS unit every couple of years as new technology comes out. And I'm replacing my phone periodically, so the features of the phone tend to get better every time, and I'm not having to buy a new unit. If you do use your phone exclusively, I've experienced this, and meeting with YouTuber John T. Young, he's experienced this as well, as the camera on your phones, the sensor on it, can get damaged from all of the vibration on the bike. I don't find, well, I need to replace my phone, but I don't find it to be a big deal because just use an old phone. You have Wi-Fi service on your old phone, and you can download apps if you're on the Wi-Fi, so you can download whatever navigation app you're going to use. I usually carry a spare phone with me in the event that my primary phone dies. I can swap that out and have all of the apps downloaded on that. Now, also talking to John, what he uses, he uses a Samsung tablet with a huge RAM mount, so he has a big navigation board with the apps, basically the same apps that we would use on an Android. So that's just something else to think about if you're going to go with your phone. If you're concerned about damaging it, maybe go pick up just a cheap drop phone. Track phones are pretty inexpensive, and you can put in all those navigation apps, or just go grab the one you've got in your drawer. If you still have old phones, use those for navigation, and then you're not so concerned about the damage that may come from it on the from the vibration, and then anything else that might happen to it if that is a concern of yours. Now, with that, I know there's concerns that your extra phone that you're using for navigation has no service and you have to attach it to Wi-Fi. Well, use your Wi-Fi hotspot from your primary phone to get navigation on your extra phone. So I'm testing that out right now, and it seems to work really well. I just use the Wi-Fi signal off of my phone, and then it keeps my maps up to date. And even though I have a downloaded map and I have a route I can run, with the connectivity, it shows me street names and things that I wouldn't normally get if I was just using the route line. So something to consider if you're going to use a backup phone for navigation and you're concerned about connectivity, just tether it to your cell phone. That works for tablets too. Tether it to your cell phone, and then you have that connectivity when you have cell service. What I use for navigation is I use an app called Rever. I think the website is rever.co. Like I said before, I do pay a subscription for it. The other thing about the Rever app that I like is it has the backcountry discovery routes preloaded, so I can drop that in my phone, pick it up, and pick up those routes at any point in time. And it makes it really, really simple. I don't have to go and pull GPX files and download them. I like the way that it loads it on there. Now, I do all of my planning on my computer, and then I can download it to my phone, and I've got everything offline like I mentioned before, what we can do with phone apps. This is just what I've done. I think it's worked pretty well. I've been using it for about 4 or 5 years, something in that range. So there's other apps out there that people are using that have different features that they offer, but this is why I use phone apps over a dedicated GPS. I was using the BMW Navigator VI on my BMW, and that had issues, and I didn't really like loading GPX files. I had a difficult time with that. I know there's a problem with that particular GPS, but I just found that the phone app is just much simpler, and it's less to think about and less to worry about, and I don't bother myself so much with not being able to just plug in some place to go. I figure I'll figure it out. I knew the route that I was going. It's eventually going to take me to towns that have gas, food, those kind of things. So I just go with it. And that's been fun on this particular trip. Making some phone calls and being asked, well, where are you? And saying, I don't know. I don't even know what state I'm in. So I found that extremely fun. If you're trying to figure out what to do for navigation, you're not sure whether to go with a dedicated GPS or using phone apps, hopefully you found this a bit useful. If you have questions, leave those in the comments below. I know there's different trains of thought on what you should use. I think there's pros and cons to both on what you want to do. The other downside of cell phones is I've got 3 of these now that I've used for navigation. I've burned in images onto the screen. So anyway, things to think about. If you have your own thoughts on what you think is better, leave those in the comments below so other people can see what other people are doing. And thanks for watching, and I will see you out there. So much for trying to film. Been one of those days, and I gotta pee before I start riding.